Hello everyone. Today we continue looking at the legacy of Stoicism and these ideas of equality and how they would, throughout time, lead to modern day ideas of equality. Now, convenient for the Roman Empire was the idea of Stoicism, the doctrine that all people, because of their ability to reason, are equals, conveniently fit the needs of a multinational Roman Empire. Roman Stoics defined Roman citizens as a world community. In fact, in all its phases, Roman Republic, Roman Empire, and what is known as the Byzantine Empire, at all its political phases, the Romans continued to assimilate and incorporate numerous ethnicities, cultures, and nations into their community. Absorption and assimilation were the very mechanisms which a single city called Rome used to create an empire and rule over several different continents. In fact, it was a literary cliche to portray Rome as essentially a melting pot that is a mixture of various nations. Roman intellectuals routinely used Stoicism to imagine and rationalize a unity underlying the Roman Empire. Because the Roman Empire continued to expand, it continued to be more cosmopolitan. It continued to be more multicultural. And Stoicism was essentially a thread linking all these territories back to the single city of Rome and therefore a single culture. In fact, if we only look at Roman elites, that is, Roman intellectuals, people who were literate, we see that those people themselves were ethnically, linguistically, culturally, and religiously diverse. That is why they turned to Stoicism, to weave all these various elements together into a single whole. And for many Roman Stoics, the Roman Empire fulfilled the Stoic ideals of a single world community. That is, humanity linked together under a single government. Arguably, one of the largest contributions the Romans made to the modern era was that of a common law. That is, a law in which everyone equally fell under. This was eventually known as the Law of Nations, and it was partially based on Stoic ideals. This Law of Nations was essentially a widespread sense of citizenship and international law. Roman jurists in particular believed that this Law of Nations should accord with natural law, that is, a law understandable by everyone who possesses reason. And this Law of Nations bound all these various cultures, ethnicities, and religions into a single imperial policy of governance. As Cicero himself said, quote, "True law is right reason in agreement with nature. It is of universal application, unchanging and everlasting. And there will not be different laws at Rome and at Athens, or different laws now and in the future, but one eternal and unchangeable law will be valid for all nations and all times." What this in practice meant is that you were not a Syrian, a Jew, a Briton, or Spaniard, but you were a citizen of Rome, equally. The cosmopolitan nature of the Roman Empire was not only reflected in its laws, institutions, and its peoples, but also in its very rulers. You had many rulers of Rome who do not derive from territories now under the political control of the European Union. That is, many people who fall outside modern European borders. You had Emperor Decius, who comes from modern-day Serbia. You also had Emperor Septimus Severus, who hailed from territories now belonging in northern Africa. You also had Emperor Marcus Aurelius Antonius, who hailed from what is now known as modern-day Syria. You also had Emperor Severus Alexander, who came from what is now modern-day Lebanon. And you mustn't forget Emperor Philip the Arab, who also came from a territory we now regard as Syria. And to return to a point I made earlier, the idea of Rome as a sort of melting pot was indeed a literary cliche. The famous Roman poet Virgil wrote a phrase that encapsulated this: "Color este pluribus unus," with its full context being, round and round passes the hand, little by little the elements lose their peculiar strength, the many colors blend into one. You also had this idea used by Cicero. Cicero wrote in Latin, "Ut efficiat bina unum ex duobus," which translates to, quote, "to make almost one out of two." In the same writing, He also evokes this idea of unity when he wrote, quote, ut unus quasi animus fiat ex pluribus, which in its full context said, quote, when the power of friendship is in him, so that he may become one, as it were, from many souls. Elsewhere, Cicero once again used this idea of one from many when he said, aut unus fiat ex pluribus. Its full context being, quote, and what Pythagoras wants in friendship is accomplished, so that he becomes one out of many. Now, these ancient Roman writings use the idea of one out of many when referring to the idea of friendship. The citizen of the late Roman Empire, Augustine of Hippo, also wrote Pluribus Unum facere, that is, quote, to take heart and make one out of many. The Roman elites who evoked and used this idea of one singleness from a bunch of various elements used this idea of one out of many in relation to friendships. This was also an idea which encapsulated the idea of community in Roman times. And these ideas of cosmopolitan unity of all these various elements blending together into one formed the basis of one of the mottos of the United States. I'm talking about et pluribus unum, or to translate, one out of many. We don't exactly know where this American motto came from. Scholarship points to the idea that et pluribus unum was taken from an English magazine during the 18th century. But regardless of that fact, the American founders who drafted the American seal and the American models knew its routine use in classical history. And given the political context of the designers of the American seal, Franklin, Adams, and Jefferson use this Roman slogan to essentially unify the 13 American colonies into a single nation. 13 colonies which at that time considered themselves to be independent nations with their own independent cultures and histories. And we see this unity out of diversity in one of the proposals that never made it. One of the original drafts for the American seal had a family crest illustrating the multicultural unity of the United States. It was meant to show the United States as essentially a single nation born out of English, Scotch, Irish, Dutch, and German ancestors. Thus, the United States from its beginning was meant to reflect the unity of Rome. The United States was designed to incorporate an endless multitude of peoples into a single culture. That is one nation, one people out of many. This is the destiny that Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson intended for the United States. And in many ways, it was a destiny that the United States achieved. And we could see this. Consider for fact the etymology of the state names. Many American states have their origins in various cultures. A portion of the American states derive from English, but not all of them. We could trace one to Dutch. Many state names also have their origins in Latin, Spanish, French, and indigenous or Native American languages. And the very names of our territories reflect the destiny laid out in the 18th century, that the United States has indeed become one force produced out of a combination of endless multitudes